spend money on the enemy that we face at the moment, which is a terrorism kind of threat, and still do the procurement of the last war that we fought, which is a large nation-state war. So it's time to get the purchase programs in the Pentagon lined up with the reality. We've spent a lot, big increases in non-defense discretionary spending. I think you could pare back almost across the board. And ultimately, anyone who looks at the federal budget knows that going forward, we will have to have less rapid growth in health and in retirement savings program or retirement support programs, or it just isn't going to add up.
You're talking about Social Security and Medicare.
Absolutely.
Alice.
I agree with Doug on the long-run problem. We have to rein in spending in the longer run and raise taxes because we're just growing our debt much faster than is sustainable. But we can't do it right now. Right now, we need to get out of this recession, get the economy growing again. We can take actions now that will affect the long-run deficit, but we should not be taking ones that will make the recession worse.
All right, tell me what you would do right now, Alice Rivlin, to get us out of this economic recession.
I would do some stimulus, well, I wouldn't call it that, as I said, aid to the states and some other kinds of spending that, as Michael said, we need, or somebody said, we need to do in the long run. We can do infrastructure spending. I think the Fed has some tools it could use, but probably won't be terribly effective. And we have to recognize we're in a deep hole, and it's going to be slow coming out.
Alice Rivlin, Senior Fellow at Brookings Institution, and you're listening to the Diane Rehm Show. Let's go to St. Louis, Missouri. Matthias, you're on the air.
Hi, how are you all?
Fine, thank you.
I was wondering if perhaps it seems like the panel all recognizes the need for a stimulus package, and I'm always hearing that corporations have tons of cash. Is it possible that we could get a stimulus package under another name that Republicans might say yes to by just doing aggressive tax credits in a targeted way to unleash this torrent of corporate capital, i.e. to get corporations to spend money at the government's, expense in terms of future tax revenue?
Alan Blinder.
Well, I think the answer to that is yes. The question is coming up with a plan. The one that's been discussed substantially and done on a very pitifully small scale is a so-called, what economists call new jobs tax credit. That's a subsidy, which creates an incentive, of course, to increase your employment. So say if you would raise your 2010 employment over your 2009 base, the government would pick up a fraction of the cost. And maybe not a trivial fraction. I'm not talking about 2 or 3%, but a substantial fraction. And I've long favored that idea. The administration suggested it maybe a year ago. The Congress enacted it under the name the HIRE Act, H-I-R-E, but on a very, very small scale. As far as I know, the evidence on the HIRE Act suggested it worked pretty well, but it was like giving a quarter of an aspirin to somebody with a big migraine. So it helped a tiny bit because it was a tiny dose.
Alan, very briefly, I'd like each of you, now that Alice has already offered her thoughts, I'd like you and Doug and Michael to each offer the one thing you would like to see done now to stimulate the economy. Alan.
I have to do one.
One.
Well, since I already mentioned the new jobs tax,
yes.
let me mention something like a CCC WPA program of direct public hiring. A lot of that would have to be at the state and local levels because the federal government, I don't think, has the capacity to absorb that many workers. Temporary jobs in the public sector.
All right, and Doug.
Well, I think Alan said earlier the key is to get spending so that businesses have some sales. I think the key is for those sales to be to other businesses. So I'm all in favor of tax provisions like the HIRE Act, which was a bipartisan act. I'll point out something we've had a hard time getting. Anything that gets businesses spending is going to be the jump start. They've got the cash, and they're the key.
All right, and finally to you, Michael.
Well, I would talk about something we haven't talked about, which is small business, which is the real generator of job growth. There's stalled legislation that's pitifully small to help small business in Congress. I would have very big directed loan programs to small business and get them moving again. That's how we'll get jobs.
Michael Greenberger, professor at the University of Maryland Law School. Alice Rivlin at the Brookings Institution. Alan Blinder, professor of economics and public affairs at Princeton University. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, president at the American Action Forum, chief economist and director of the CBO from 2003 to 2006. Thank you all so much. Thanks for listening all. I'm Diane Rehm.
The Diane Rehm Show is produced by Sandra Pinkard, Nancy Robertson, Susan Neighbors, Denise Couture, and Monique Nazareth. The engineer is Toby Schreiner. Dory Annisman answers the phones. Visit drshow.org for audio archives, transcripts, podcasts, and CD sales. Call 202-885-1200 for more information. Our email address is drshow@wamu.org. This program comes to you from American University in Washington. This is NPR.